The father who left his family for 10 years returns asking for help. The reason behind his disappearance will leave you speechless. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. On a peaceful afternoon, the golden sun illuminated the narrow streets of the town, mirroring the calmness of a life that seemed to follow its course without major surprises. Rosa felt the soft breeze on her face as she walked along the cobblestone streets. She wore a gentle smile, one that revealed a quiet, almost secret happiness. Beside her, Henrique watched her with tender eyes. He was a simple man, with gentle gestures and a comforting presence. Their life together was the dream they had both nurtured, a routine filled with affection and companionship, where small acts like sharing dinner or strolling through the square made the love they felt a safe harbor. That night, Rosa prepared a special dinner. With a hint of nervousness, she waited for Henrique to come home to share news that would change their lives. He entered the house with the usual weariness of someone who had spent the day working in the fields, but seeing the brightness in her eyes, he smiled. Rosa took his hands, looked at him intently, and with a trembling voice told him she was expecting a child. Henrique was silent for a moment, but soon his face lit up with a broad smile, and he embraced her tightly. The prospect of a child seemed to seal the happiness that was already complete. Yet like a wind that suddenly shifts direction, fate seemed to have other plans for Rosa. Just a few days after that night, Henrique left early, as usual, promising to return by dusk. Time passed, and she waited for hours. At first, she thought he might be delayed, caught up with a task in the field or helping a neighbor. But as night fell and he didn't return, her concern began to grow into a profound fear. The news of his disappearance soon spread through the town. People whispered, casting sympathetic glances at Rosa as she searched desperately for answers. Each dawn, she prepared herself for the possibility of seeing him walk through the door. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Hope slowly faded, replaced by a feeling of abandonment and a silent sorrow. In time, Rosa understood that she was alone. The weight of the responsibility for a life growing within her required her to be strong, to overcome the pain and emptiness. Henrique's memories lingered everywhere, from the scent of his coat to the moments they had shared in the streets of the town. However, the certainty that he would not return began to take root in her heart. People around her tried to console her, but she felt that no one could truly grasp the depth of her pain. Even so, Rosa remained steadfast, determined to face the reality that fate had handed her. Amid the solitude, she found strength within herself, and the promise to be a devoted and present mother started to guide her steps. Thus, the love she once shared with Henrique transformed into resilience. Rosa was now prepared to face anything for the defenseless being who would soon come into the world, even without a father by their side. She knew there would be hard days, but she also knew she couldn't give up. The small town seemed to age alongside Rosa. Every corner held memories of the past, and each familiar face carried a look of pity, but also silent admiration for the woman who never gave up. Rosa was now the mother of 2 girls, Clara and Laura, her precious reasons to keep moving forward. Henrique's absence was still an open wound, but over time she learned to hide it, to keep smiling, and to fight for her family's survival. Rosa had secured a job as a waitress at a modest restaurant in town. The work was grueling, the days long, and the pay meager, but she was determined to support her daughters with dignity, refusing to rely on others' charity. At the end of each shift, she felt the weight of exhaustion in every muscle. But seeing her daughter's smiles when she arrived home seemed to renew her energy, if only for a few hours. Clara and Laura, even from a young age, shared their mother's burdens. Clara, the eldest, was serious and observant, taking care of her sister with the responsibility of someone who understands early on the value of family unity. Laura, on the other hand, possessed an almost naive sweetness, a way of seeing the world that softened the harshness of their reality. Despite the difficulties, the two girls maintained the light-heartedness of childhood, inventing simple games and savoring the rare moments when they could just be children. The family's routine was marked by rigid schedules and few breaks. The girls attended school in the mornings and, in the afternoons, helped with small tasks at home or odd jobs for neighbors. Every penny saved was cherished, a symbol of their collective effort. Rosa, even when exhausted, did her best to be present for the important moments, to offer guidance, and above all to show that they would never be alone. The entire town followed Rosa and her daughter's struggle. Some people offered subtle help, disguised as kindness, like a discount at the market or an occasional meal. Others simply watched, perhaps impressed by Rosa's strength. And though rumors about Henrique's whereabouts lingered in the residents' whispers, Rosa remained steadfast, as if she had built an invisible wall between herself and others' curiosity. One evening, while preparing dinner with her daughters, Rosa realized how quickly Clara and Laura had grown. Each in her own way already displayed a maturity that most children would take years to develop. Their relationship was intense, forged in daily struggles and unconditional support. Clara, with her precocious wisdom, would ask her mother about life, while Laura, more sensitive, would embrace Rosa and reassure her that everything would be okay. Looking at her daughters, Rosa felt both grateful and overwhelmed by the responsibility. At times, the weight of loneliness seemed unbearable, but her love for Clara and Laura was the force that kept her standing. She knew that these girls deserved a different future, one lighter and full of opportunity, and for that, she worked tirelessly. That same night, watching her daughters sleep, Rosa made a silent promise. She would never allow Henrique's absence to define their fate. She would fight every day, enduring exhaustion, judgmental looks and hardships, so that Clara and Laura could have the life she had always dreamed of for them. The journey would be hard, but Rosa was determined. After all, each small victory, from an extra day of food on the table to her daughter's smiles, was a reminder that the struggle was worth it, and that despite everything, they were a family. Years went by, and Clara and Laura grew up under Rosa's attentive and loving gaze, becoming determined young women who understood the value of effort and unity. The sisters' teenage years were marked by responsibility and a deep desire to repay their mother's sacrifices. The emptiness left by Henrique, though still painful, became a silent mystery, one they both learned to ignore to keep moving forward. Clara, now 17, was a focused and driven young woman. From an early age, she took an interest in her studies and developed a sharp sense of justice, always questioning anything she saw as unfair or dishonest. Inspired by the struggles she witnessed in her town and by her mother's resilience, Clara dreamed of becoming a lawyer. As a defender of the underprivileged, she wanted to change the world around her, beginning with the small injustices of everyday life. Laura, a bit younger, had a gentler and more empathetic personality. Unlike her sister's seriousness, she had a tenderness that endeared her to those around her. Laura had a special affection for helping others and decided she wanted to pursue a career in dentistry, providing care for people who often lacked access to basic health services. Her dream was to serve the townspeople with the same dedication she saw in Rosa every day. The bond between the sisters was strong, but the void left by their father's absence lingered as a shadow over them. On some nights, when the town was silent and the biting wind brought memories of harder times, Clara and Laura would talk about their father. They whispered questions. Why had he disappeared? Had it been a choice or something forced upon him? Had he stopped loving them, or had something deeper driven him away? Rosa, for her part, avoided the subject. The few times Clara tried to bring it up, she would turn away, her gaze distant, filled with memories and unspoken pain. Although the sisters respected her reluctance, the mystery of their father was something they both quietly yearned to unravel. Financial difficulties persisted, but over time Rosa began to receive help from her daughters, who took on small jobs in town. Clara worked on documents for a local lawyer, gaining insights into the profession, while Laura assisted a dentist, learning basic skills she knew in her heart she would use in the future. Despite their dreams and busy lives, the sisters remained by Rosa's side. During times when their mother seemed too weary, they joined forces, helping with household chores and ensuring nothing was lacking. Their relationship was defined by a mutual affection, forged through shared hardship and unwavering support. The town watched with admiration as the sisters grew up. Many remembered Clara and Laura as little girls helping their mother, and now, seeing them carving out their own paths, felt a mix of pride and curiosity. Henrique's disappearance was still spoken of in hushed tones, but no one dared to ask Rosa or the girls about him. After all, everyone knew that, even in his absence, he remained an inexplicable presence in these women's lives. At this stage, Rosa began to see in her daughter's eyes the reflections of her own interrupted dreams. The pride she felt for them was tinged with a subtle melancholy, for in her heart, she knew that her daughter's strength was a reflection of all that Henrique had failed to build with them. Each day, Rosa felt more deeply the complexity of family ties and the impact of an absence that, although silent, remained a constant part of their lives. Now, Clara and Laura were ready to fight for their own dreams, yet somewhere within them lay a persistent question connecting them to the past. Meanwhile, Rosa sensed that a new chapter was approaching, a feeling that one day they would need to confront the ghost of Henrique, whether through memories or a desire for understanding. Time marched on, and the dreams Clara and Laura had nurtured since their teenage years finally began to materialize. With her focus and determination, Clara endured a demanding path of study and sacrifice, ultimately becoming a respected lawyer. Her presence in the courtroom was firm and assured, a fierce defender of the rights of the disadvantaged. She specialized in social causes, dedicating herself to making justice accessible to all, especially those who, like her family, had endured hardships and challenges. Laura, meanwhile, pursued her path in dentistry with the same gentleness that had always defined her. After years of study and work, she established herself as a dentist in the town. Laura welcomed patients with warmth and care, focusing not only on their treatment but also on their overall well-being. She quickly earned the trust and gratitude of the residents, who saw in her not only a skilled professional but also a kind-hearted friend. Rosa, now in her later years, felt immense pride watching her daughters thrive. Each visit from Clara and Laura brought stories of their work, the challenges they faced, and the praises they received, bringing tears to her eyes. She remembered the days they had struggled together, the exhaustion and the tears they had shed. Knowing her daughters had overcome so many adversities was the greatest reward she could ever imagine. However, despite their achievements and apparent stability, the void left by Henrique's absence still lingered in the lives of the three women. The sisters, now strong and successful, still bore the scars of their father's absence. Often, when discussing the past, Clara and Laura exchanged looks of understanding and resentment, sharing the weight of a story that had never found closure. Clara, with her sense of justice, tried to fill that void through her work, believing that by fighting for other families, she was, in some way, protecting her own. Laura, on the other hand, found solace in caring for others, transforming her clinic into a welcoming space where people felt valued. Each sister had her own way of coping with the pain of absence, but the feeling was the same, an inexplicable longing and a tinge of bitterness toward the father who had chosen to leave. Though Rosa tried to conceal her own wounds, her daughters sensed that she too still suffered. In quiet moments, Rosa's gaze would drift to the horizon, as if searching for answers that never arrived. Time had toughened the outer shell around her pain, but the core of sadness remained untouched. And as she watched her daughters move forward with their lives, she recognized that Henrique's absence continued to cast its shadow, influencing every decision, every achievement. The town, which had witnessed Clara and Laura's growth, acknowledged the sisters' strength and resilience. Many admired the family and whispered to one another about how inspiring those women were. Yet curiosity about Henrique's whereabouts hadn't entirely faded. Townspeople avoided speaking openly about him, but in secret they speculated about what might have driven him away and why he had never returned. One afternoon, as Rosa, Clara, and Laura sat talking on the porch, Clara, with her determined gaze, finally voiced a question that had lingered in all their minds. "Mum, have you ever thought that one day Dad might come back?" Rosa was silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon, trying to hide the storm of emotions the question had stirred. "Maybe, dear," she replied softly, her voice distant, "but I've learned to live without that answer." That brief moment of vulnerability was enough for them all to realize that the past still followed them, like a shadow that would never fully disappear. Clara and Laura understood that even with their successes, Henrique's return, or at least the truth behind his disappearance, was the missing piece that could finally bring them peace. Thus their lives continued, balancing the pride of achievement with the weight of unanswered questions. With each victory Clara achieved in court, or each patient Laura treated, Rosa's pride grew. But somewhere within, an emptiness remained, still waiting for closure. It was an ordinary morning when Rosa, Clara, and Laura's lives were turned upside down. News quickly spread throughout the town. Henrique was back. Many years had passed since he disappeared without a trace, but now he was there, walking with hesitant steps and a weary expression, like a ghost from a past they believed they had left behind. The reunion didn't happen right away. Rosa learned of Henrique's return from a neighbor who came rushing to tell her, a mix of shock and curiosity in her voice. Rosa's heart raced, but her mind tried to rationalize what she was hearing. Why, after all these years, had he decided to return? And why did he seem so frail? The news brought a torrent of emotions she had long buried. The love she once felt, the anger over his abandonment, and the sadness for the life he had left behind. When Clara and Laura heard about their father's return, their reactions were mixed. Clara, with her sense of justice and rationality, felt a surge of anger. She couldn't fathom the idea that Henrique thought he could simply reappear after so many years of absence. To her, his return felt like an affront, an invasion into a life he had abandoned by choice. Laura, however, was flooded with a confusing mix of emotions. As much as she felt the pain of his absence, she couldn't shake a flicker of compassion for her father. His sickly, weakened appearance moved her, bringing out the caring and generous side that defined her. For days, Henrique kept his distance, aware that his presence was an open wound for his family. He stayed at the small inn in town, isolated and silent. He didn't seek out Rosa or the daughters directly, as if he were waiting for them to take the initiative. However, this only fueled more rumors and speculation among the townspeople, who watched closely for any sign from the family. Clara and Laura discussed the situation countless times. While Clara insisted they should ignore Henrique and keep him out of their lives, Laura felt they should at least hear what he had to say. Despite her resentment, she couldn't ignore her father's fragile condition. Rosa, on the other hand, listened quietly to her daughter's discussions without giving any indication of her decision. Deep down, she wondered whether a reunion would bring them peace or merely reopen the wounds she had fought so hard to bury. Eventually, Rosa decided to walk to the inn. She wasn't ready to face Henrique, but she felt compelled to see for herself the man who had once been the love of her life, and now felt like a stranger. As she walked, memories flooded her mind, of the times they had spent together, the dreams they had shared, and the anguish of his abandonment. But when she arrived, she hesitated, choosing not to go inside. Instead, she observed him from a distance, peering through the window. Henrique looked very different. He was visibly weakened, his face etched with a mix of exhaustion and regret. Even without speaking to him, Rosa could sense the weight he bore, as if the past had left invisible scars as deep as those she and her daughters carried. She returned home more confused than ever, unsure whether to open her heart to a conversation or to shield her daughters from a pain that felt all too raw. Days later, Henrique mustered the courage to write a letter to Rosa. It was brief, asking only for a chance to explain what had kept him away for so long. He acknowledged the pain he had caused and expressed his remorse, but he pleaded for one final opportunity to reveal the truth before his time ran out. Rosa read the letter repeatedly, uncertain whether she could forgive him or even wanted to hear what he had to say. That night, she shared the letter with her daughters. Clara, upon reading her father's words, responded with coldness, feeling that it was far too late for explanations. Laura, however, argued that perhaps it was worth understanding why he had left, no matter how painful it might be. The three women spent the night debating, each struggling with her emotions in her own way. The past, which had always loomed like a shadow over them, was now more present than ever, and the decision to listen to Henrique could change everything they had built together. The tension in Rosa's home was palpable, as if the air itself were thick with memories and resentments on the verge of breaking free. Since Henrique's arrival, the silence brimming with unanswered questions and buried pain had grown even denser. Each of the three women dealt with the situation in her own way, trying to protect herself while deciding if she was ready to face the man who had left them. Clara maintained a firm, resolute stance. To her, Henrique was someone who had chosen to leave, forfeiting any right to come back into their lives. Her indignation was fueled by years of hard work, building a life for herself and her family without relying on a father's presence. The idea of hearing any justification from him filled her with anger. She felt Henrique hadn't just abandoned Rosa, but had burdened his daughters with an absence they had to carry alone. Laura, on the other hand, still felt a glimmer of compassion for her father. She recalled the few details Rosa had shared about the warmth Henrique had shown before his disappearance. For her, there was a gap in the story that needed to be filled. Despite her hurt, she couldn't ignore Henrique's fragile state and saw a possibility of forgiveness that might bring peace to them all. Laura tried to convince Clara that giving him a chance to explain himself could help them all move on, but her sister was adamant. Rosa watched her daughter's arguments in silence, knowing that the final decision rested with her. In her heart, conflicting emotions intertwined. On one hand, she wanted to protect her daughters from further pain, fearing that Henrique's presence would reopen wounds they had spent years healing. On the other, she knew that holding on to resentment would only keep them bound to the past. She herself was torn between the anger she had carried all these years and a curiosity about what had driven Henrique to disappear. That night, Rosa decided to leave the house to clear her mind. She walked the empty streets, trying to make sense of her feelings. She passed by places that held memories of Henrique and the dreams they had once shared. The quiet of the early hours enveloped her, and each corner seemed to whisper fragments of a past she had tried to forget. Eventually, she found herself standing in front of the inn where Henrique was staying, her heart racing and her mind overwhelmed with a mix of emotions. But she didn't go in. She simply watched from a distance, hesitating to confront the man who had once been the love of her life. The next day, Rosa gathered her daughters for a definitive conversation. She felt that, as their mother, she needed to end this cycle of pain and resentment that had marked their lives for so long. She decided Henrique would have the chance to speak, but under one condition. The meeting would take place in their home, where they felt safe. Rosa also made it clear that if at any point they felt uncomfortable, the conversation would end. Clara, still reluctant, accepted her mother's decision with a certain coldness. Although she was opposed to it, she knew she couldn't stop Rosa from seeking the answers she had longed for. Laura, on the other hand, felt a sense of relief. Despite her nervousness, she believed the reunion could bring long-awaited answers that, for her, were essential to understanding not just who Henrique was, but also who they were as a family. The day of the meeting arrived. Rosa and her daughters sat in the living room, the silence between them heavy. When the door opened and Henrique stepped inside, he looked even older, burdened by guilt and weakened by illness. He gazed at each of them with sorrowful eyes, as if he carried the weight of a lifetime of regret. Henrique began speaking in a low voice, admitting that not a day had gone by without him thinking about the family he had left behind. He acknowledged his mistake, but he pleaded for them to hear him out. He revealed that a dark secret had forced him to leave, a burden he had chosen to bear alone to protect Rosa and the girls. As he spoke, his eyes reflected the toll of the sacrifice he had made. Clara remained stiff, her arms crossed as if shielding herself from her father's words. Laura, however, let a tear escape, torn between pain and compassion. Rosa, silently listening, felt a strange sense of relief as she heard Enrique's voice, as if the past were finally surfacing, offering a chance for redemption and perhaps peace. The emotions were intense, but each of them knew that this moment marked a new starting point. As painful as it was, they were determined to listen to what Henrique had to say, for they sensed that only by facing this moment could they truly move forward. Henrique sat in the small living room of the house that had once been his home, his hands trembling and his eyes moist with memories. The heavy silence between him, Rosa, and his daughters held years of unanswered questions and lingering pain that needed to be addressed. After a deep breath, he began to reveal the story he had kept secret for so long, the reason he had chosen to leave, even though he knew it would break his family's hearts. He explained that before his disappearance, he had become entangled in a dangerous situation. He had been working for a small-town merchant, a seemingly ordinary man who, as Henrique later discovered, was secretly involved in illicit activities. Henrique had accidentally uncovered that the merchant was using his business as a front for criminal operations and had connections with a dangerous smuggling ring operating in the area. Henrique knew he couldn't stay silent. When he confronted the merchant and threatened to expose him, he was met with threats. The man made it clear that if Henrique dared to speak out, his family would pay the price. The threats were blunt and terrifying, and Henrique realized that Rosa and the girls' safety was at stake. He faced a life-or-death decision between staying by their side and protecting them from a distance. As he shared this part of his story, Henrique lowered his eyes, ashamed. He confessed that his first instinct had been to run to Rosa and tell her everything, but the fear of endangering their lives held him back. Instead, he made the painful decision to disappear, believing that by vanishing, he would divert the criminals' attention. He left town and moved from place to place to ensure no one would trace him, all the while hoping that someday he might be able to return. Clara and Laura listened with contrasting expressions. Clara, still grappling with resentment, struggled to grasp the gravity of the situation her father had faced, while Laura, more emotional, was struck by the difficult choices Henrique had been forced to make. To them, his story seemed like something out of a nightmare, a cruel reality they could never have imagined. Rosa sat silently, allowing a few tears to fall as she absorbed the depth of Henrique's sacrifice. She felt a mix of sorrow for the life they could have shared and empathy for him, who had spent years running, carrying the burden alone. Henrique explained that over time the criminal ring had been dismantled, allowing him, at last, to feel safe enough to return. Hearing her father's account, Clara felt her heart's defenses begin to waver. For the first time, her anger softened into understanding. Though still hurt, she could see that Henrique had been trapped in an impossible situation where any decision would bring pain. Laura, who had always longed to understand why her father had left, felt a sense of relief. The emptiness left by years of absence remained, but now there was an explanation she could accept. Still, Henrique knew that words alone could not erase the past. He apologized sincerely to Rosa and his daughters, asking for the forgiveness he had longed for, yet without expecting it right away. He explained that through all those years, he had never stopped loving them, that his heart had always belonged to them, even from afar. With a heavy heart, Rosa looked into Henrique's eyes, and for the first time felt she truly understood the depth of his love for her and their daughters, a love that, ironically, had driven him to make such a heartbreaking decision. In silence, she reached out and took his hand in a gesture of reconciliation. It was a small touch, but it carried profound meaning, as if, in that moment, their wounds had begun to heal. Clara and Laura too felt conflicted, but seeing their mother extend her hand to Henrique stirred something within them. Clara, hesitant, managed a small tentative smile at her father, a first step toward forgiveness, while Laura, overwhelmed with emotion, took his other hand, showing that despite the pain, there was still love. The secret was finally out, and while the wounds would take time to heal, the reunion marked the beginning of a new chapter. Henrique, at last, felt free of the weight of the past, and Rosa and her daughters in turn could now look to the future with less resentment and more understanding. With the secret finally out, the air in Rosa's house felt lighter, but the past still cast shadows over everyone. Each of the three women tried in her own way to process Henrique's confession and decide how to move forward. Although there was now a greater understanding of what he had gone through, full forgiveness still seemed like a long journey filled with emotional hurdles. Clara, always rational and justice-oriented, couldn't shake the feeling that her father could have made different choices. During the many sleepless nights she had spent beside Rosa and Laura, she had wondered if Henrique had truly fought hard enough to stay with them. While her attitude had softened somewhat, she still felt a deep resentment, and forgiveness did not come easily. She struggled with the sense of betrayal, balancing the love she had for her family against the pain of being left behind. Laura, on the other hand, tried to focus on the human side of the situation. Though she had felt her father's absence as intensely as Clara had, she could see Henrique's vulnerability etched into his face and fragile health. Her natural compassion helped her see him as someone who had also been a victim of circumstances. For Laura, forgiveness seemed the best way to bring peace to herself and her family, but she knew she couldn't force Clara to feel the same way. Rosa, however, felt caught in a web of complex emotions. Although she had extended her hand to Henrique in a gesture of initial forgiveness, she knew the wounds left by his absence would not heal overnight. Anger and love mingled, leaving her confused about what was fair and what was necessary for them to move on. His confession had brought some relief by answering questions that had haunted her heart for years, but it also stirred new reflections on the nature of love and the lengths one might go to protect those they care for. As the three women wrestled with their emotions, news of Henrique's return continued to spread through town. People discussed him with curiosity and even suspicion. Many doubted his story, suggesting he might just be making excuses to redeem himself. Clara and Laura felt the pressure of these rumors, but Rosa faced the gossip with her head held high, focusing on restoring peace within her family. Henrique, aware that total forgiveness might never come, began visiting Rosa's house more regularly. He didn't force intimacy with his daughters, but made himself present and offered help in any way he could. He did small repairs, tended to the garden, and looked for ways to show that his intentions were sincere. His quiet, humble gestures gradually conveyed to the three women that he was genuinely committed to regaining what he had lost. One day, while Rosa and Henrique shared a conversation in the yard, Clara watched them through the window. Seeing the two of them together, despite the years and the pain that had separated them, touched something in her heart. The scene reminded her of the few happy memories she still held of her father. She realized that, although still hurt, she might be ready to try to understand the man he had become. She decided that forgiveness, as difficult as it might be, could be a way to free herself from the weight of the past. Laura, noticing her sister beginning to lower her guard, felt a renewed sense of hope. For her, forgiveness had always been a clear path, and seeing Clara open to the idea suggested they might finally find the peace they all sought. That evening, the sisters asked to speak with their father alone, without Rosa present. Henrique, emotional and surprised by their request, gathered all the courage he could and prepared to face their questions and feelings. They spoke candidly, sharing the pain they had carried with a frankness that made Henrique realize the extent of the hurt he had caused. In the end, Clara and Laura made it clear that although forgiveness was still a work in progress, they were willing to try. Henrique, with tears in his eyes, thanked them for the chance he had thought he would never have. In that moment, he understood that forgiveness was not something he could demand, but something he would have to earn each day, with patience and humility. This meeting with his daughters marked a significant step forward for the family. Though the wounds would still need time to heal, Henrique began to feel that he might once again be part of their lives. Rosa, Clara, and Laura, too, realized that the choice between forgiveness and revenge was not an easy one, but that love and the desire for peace might, after all, be the path to a less painful future. Henrique knew time was no longer on his side. The illness that had weakened him was progressing swiftly, and he felt the weight of each passing day. Yet there was something different in his heart, a peace slowly settling in, brought about by his attempts at reconciliation with Rosa and his daughters. He knew he could never reclaim the lost years, but he felt he could at least leave one final memory, a symbol of the love and sacrifice he had always felt for them. Clara and Laura, watching their father's health decline, realized that the time they had with him was limited. Henrique's presence in their lives, though recent and full of complexities, stirred conflicting feelings within them. Despite the pain he had caused, his presence awakened long-buried memories of their childhood and showed them that a father's love could be real, even after so much suffering. They knew the moment of farewell was approaching, but this time they felt prepared to face it. Rosa, meanwhile, observed Henrique's state with a melancholic serenity. Deep down, there was a part of her that still loved the man he had been, and she knew that forgiving him had been the right choice. In the mornings, she helped him get up and gently encouraged him to spend more time with Clara and Laura. She understood that her daughters needed those final moments to find closure for the lingering wounds and questions that had followed them throughout their lives. One quiet afternoon, Henrique gathered the strength to invite Rosa and the girls to a conversation. Seated in the backyard, where the late afternoon sun cast a soft glow over them, he expressed his gratitude for the chance to be with each of them. There was a sincerity in his voice that the three women recognized, a vulnerability that touched them deeply. He admitted that his greatest regret was not having found a way to stay with them, but that if he had to choose again, he would still prioritize their safety. Henrique's words met Clara and Laura's hearts with newfound lightness. Both had moved past the resentment phase, and they realized that despite the pain, their father's love had always been genuine, even from afar. Clara, who had been so resistant and critical, held Henrique's hand and with teary eyes thanked him for trying to protect them, even from a distance. Laura, more emotional, couldn't hold back her tears and embraced him, finally feeling that the emptiness in her heart was being filled by mutual understanding. Henrique, overcome with emotion, looked at Rosa, and they exchanged a sad but knowing smile. He knew that Rosa had been the strength holding everything together during his absence, and in a silent gesture of gratitude, he held her hand gently. Rosa returned the gesture, and in that moment, all they had endured, the pain, the hopes, the goodbyes, seemed to find a sense of resolution. The days that followed were filled with farewells, but also with a closeness that strengthened their bonds. Henrique spent most of his time with Clara and Laura, sharing stories and memories he had kept to himself all those years. He spoke to them about the dreams he'd had for their family, the plans he was never able to fulfill, and the memories he held dear. Each conversation brought father and daughters closer, leaving them with a profound sense of reconciliation and love. Finally, on a quiet morning, Henrique passed away, surrounded by Rosa, Clara, and Laura. He left with a final smile, relieved to have been forgiven and able to rest in peace. Clara and Laura, though their hearts were heavy, felt at peace, knowing their father had departed with the certainty that his love had always been true. The house, though marked by the loss, felt lighter. Rosa and her daughters now felt that the past had been laid to rest and that Henrique's love would remain with them always. His sacrifice, however painful, left a legacy of resilience and understanding, teaching them that even amidst the deepest sorrows, it was still possible to find a path to forgiveness and peace. Henrique's passing brought a serene peace to Rosa's home, though his absence was still deeply felt. Rosa, Clara, and Laura continued with their lives, but now they felt that the weight of the past, once a constant shadow, had finally lifted. Henrique's sacrifice and story had changed them in ways that only time could explain, and in a way he remained with them, a silent presence guiding their choices and strengthening their bond. With a lighter heart, Clara threw herself deeper into her work as a lawyer. Her father's story had awakened in her a renewed empathy and a greater drive to fight for those who, like her own family, faced difficult circumstances and impossible choices. She became a fierce advocate for vulnerable people, using her experience to inspire others and to avoid judging without understanding the complexity behind each person's choices. In her clinic, Laura found her daily work of caring for people had gained new meaning. Every recovered smile, every conversation with a patient reminded her of the compassion her father had shown in protecting their family. She dedicated herself with even more passion, offering kindness and attentiveness to everyone, believing that small acts of compassion were part of Henrique's legacy. Rosa, in turn, found a tranquility she hadn't felt in years. She grew older, surrounded by the love and success of her daughters, knowing she had done her best to raise them and keep them united, even through the hardest times. Henrique's memory now brought with it a sense of gratitude for what he had left for their family, however painful the journey had been. She understood that his love for them had been real, and that he had done what he believed was necessary to protect them. One day, feeling nostalgic, Rosa decided to organize the few items Henrique had left behind. Letters, old notes, and some photos yellowed with age. She shared these fragments of memory with Clara and Laura as symbols of the link between past and future. The daughters, moved, kept these objects close, knowing they represented not only their family's story, but also the lessons they had learned about love, forgiveness, and resilience. The town, observing the growth and unity of Rosa's family, came to see them as an example of strength. Once curious and full of assumptions, the townspeople now respected the path of the three women. They knew that Clara and Laura were a reflection of Rosa's perseverance, and that Henrique, despite his long absence, had also played a vital role in their story of resilience. In the end, the three women knew that Henrique would live on through them. Clara and Laura continued to visit Rosa as often as they could, keeping alive the spirit of unity that he had helped foster. Around the dinner table, they shared memories, laughter, and stories of the difficult times, feeling comforted by the fact that they had finally found the answers they had always sought. Over time, the pain of loss gave way to serenity, and Henrique's legacy became an invisible pillar connecting mother and daughters. Their journey proved that even in the most complex situations, love and forgiveness have the power to turn the deepest wounds into scars of wisdom and understanding. Thus, the cycle of life, sacrifice, and redemption came to completion, leaving Rosa, Clara, and Laura with the certainty that, even in the face of great pain, love would always find its way. And so ends the moving story of Rosa, Clara, Laura, and Henrique, a journey of love, sacrifice, and redemption that has shown us how forgiveness can transform even the deepest pains. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to receive updates on all new content. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think Rosa, Clara, and Laura made the right choice in forgiving Henrique? Or do you believe that, after so many years, it was impossible to mend the pain of his absence? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your opinion and exchange thoughts about this story filled with emotions and twists. Your comment is super important to us, and it helps the channel grow. So, don't forget to share your view on forgiveness and the strength of family bonds. And of course, if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button to follow more stories like this one. See you in the next video.